We are here to go over the applications and how we work the fellowship here, the Irene Yamamoto Arts Writers Fellowship. So if this seems very foreign to you, then you're probably in the wrong webinar, but hopefully you're in the right one. A little bit about us and the fellowship. The Daniel K. Inouye National Center for the Preservation of Democracy, or the Democracy Center, resides at the Japanese American National Museum. The museum, excuse me, uplifts the culture of Japanese Americans. We look at it through a particular lens of the history of Japanese Americans from before World War II, during the World War II incarceration, and then the years after, particularly with redress and reparations, as well as contributions to American culture from Japanese Americans. The Democracy Center allows the museum to reach broader audiences, much more intersectionality, and we reach out to people from across the spectrum. Part of what we do is also uplift the arts in terms of representation, as well as how the arts fit into our democracy. This is the third year for the Irene Yamamoto Arts Writers Fellowship. It started 2 years ago. Last year, the fellowship decided that it wanted to focus on a specific arts criticism discipline each year. So last year was broadly performing arts, and this year the fellowship will provide two $5,000 unrestricted awards to two emerging writers of color who write critically about music. It is a competitive fellowship, meaning it's just not a matter of checking boxes and getting the award. It is a competitive process. A little bit about Ms. Yamamoto. She was a lifelong lover of the arts. She and her family were incarcerated in the Gila River concentration camp in Arizona. And when she came back to Los Angeles, she studied at UCLA and was involved in the arts, both in her career as well as in her spare time and as her avocation. The fellowship is generously made possible from a gift from Sharon Mazzota, who is Irene's niece. And the project is also supported by an organization called Critical Minded, which is an initiative to invest in cultural critics of color, and was co-founded by the Nathan Cummings Foundation, as well as the Ford Foundation. So let's get started in terms of the fellowship application itself. So important dates to remember. The submission period is now open and will run through November 17th. Important, please look at the portal closing times. This is one of the questions we get asked all the time. We've had issues in the past, even before I was working on this fellowship program. I worked on other fellowship programs, and deadlines were always seemed to be an issue. The portal closes at 11:59 p.m. on March 17th, but it's Mountain Time because that's where Cafe is located. Cafe is call for entry, our application system. So be mindful of where you are in terms of time zones if you're planning on submitting that day. So for example, Eastern time zone, you'll actually have till 1:59 a.m. on March 18th. In Honolulu, I think, would that be 8:59 or 7:59 on the 17th? I always forget if you're 2 or 3 hours behind us. But in general, please do not wait till the last minute to submit your applications. And it happens all the time. I am a procrastinator. I wait till the last minute, but make the last minute like 3 or 4 days before the application closes. Every year we have people who have issues with the system, with uploading their documentation, with uploading their writing samples. And at that point, there's nothing that we can do. If you miss the deadline, you miss the deadline. So please plan on submitting well before the end of the call period. The 17th, I believe, is a Monday. So submitting that weekend would be great. But again, if you're having technical difficulties, you want to be able to make sure that you can still reach Cafe for that assistance. If you have issues with technical issues with the Cafe system, we ask that you contact their help desk because there's nothing really that we can do. It's not our system. We can help maybe get you to somebody if you're having that kind of difficulty, but really the best thing to do is to contact them directly. After the portal closes, we go through some internal reviews, and that will be conducted probably from the beginning of April through mid-May. We'll talk a little bit about how the review period works. Awards will be made in early June. We will reach out directly to the 2 finalists and let them know, and we'll get the documentation that we need to make the grant. And then you have the fellowship period, which lasts through the end of December. I'm sorry, it should be updated to December 2025 on here. Any questions so far? So both Sophia and I are monitoring the questions tab. So if you do, please feel free to drop those in there. So eligibility, you must reside in or be a citizen of the United States, be at least 18 years of age. This is specific to people who identify as a member of a community with ancestry in one of the original peoples of Africa, Asia, the Americas, Oceania, or the Pacific Islands. We ask that you have less than 2 years of publication experience, which may include blogs or self-publishing. The goal of the fellowship is really to uplift and find those emerging writers who are at the beginnings of their career, where this kind of award can really make the difference as to whether they continue to pursue that career and help them at that early stages. And you should also have some sort of demonstrated commitment to writing about music, not just something from the last few months, but usually at least those couple of years, we want to see that kind of commitment to writing about music. So the application process. When you log on to the application through Cafe, you'll be asked some very basic sort of demographic questions that enable us to identify, who you are and be able to contact you. I do want to go back to some of the questions. If you've been self-published since 2020, if you've been writing about music since 2020, you probably fall out of the eligibility scope. But I will talk a little bit about that a little bit more in just a second. Do you need to be published? You can be self-published, you can be on blogs, but you have to have some sort of history of writing, at least for the past 2 years. So, in terms of publishing or being published, it has to be something, again, that is public. It is something that is generally seen as written for public consumption, not necessarily writing that has been done for academic purposes. You're welcome to submit academic writing, but again, it's important to show that you're committed to writing about music in a public way. Only publishing around so Brittany, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly. Yes, if you started writing about music within the past 2 years, yeah, that's fine. And we'll talk about that again in a little bit. Writing about music, but only performed publicly. So if the music is performed publicly, that's fine. It doesn't have to be a recording. It can be um, anything to do with music, even the music industry, but it has to be a piece of criticism. Talk a little bit more about that in a second. Um, can you go back and add links to published works? No, you can't. Um, and you have to submit the actual written work, not just a link to works. Um, as I go through this application, I think some of this will help answer some of your questions. So we asked that you submit a cover letter that will help introduce yourself, your work, why you're applying for the fellowship, and how you would spend the money. This is read by the reviewers as part of the overall package. Um, you ask that you submit either a resume or a curriculum vitae. Um, this should include all of your relevantly published works. So that's where we can see the depth of the history of your writing. We ask that you submit a short biography, which summarizes your background and your writing interests, how you came to want to do this work, and then anything else that you want the panel to know. There'll actually be a question for that. And I'll talk a little bit about that because that's where you can really make the case. So, Brittany, for your example of you've been writing for 5 years, but only writing for the last 2 years about music, that's where you can make that case of why you are an emerging writer in music in that section called anything else that you'd like the panel to know. That's your chance to kind of advocate for yourself if you feel that you're not, that some of what you're submitting or some of the things in your background may lead people to think that you're not eligible. This is where you can make those kinds of statements as to why you feel you are eligible for this fellowship. And then you're asked to submit up to 3 writing samples with a total of 3,000 words total. And we'll talk about writing samples in just a second. No, you can't submit access. If you're talking about other people's submissions, no, we can't provide that information. Unless you were talking about your own submissions in the past, I don't know if that's possible. Is there criteria around the kinds of pieces that we can critique? It has to be music related. I will share some of this in just a second. So here's, in terms of writing samples, they should be works of criticism or reviews of live or recorded music. They must provide critical, analytical, or an interpretive perspective on a piece or pieces of music. And here, music is defined as a creation that is expressed primarily as sound. A review of a film soundtrack, for example, would be appropriate, but not a review of the film. A criticism of an audio recording of songs from an opera or musical theater production would be considered, but a response to the overall production would not. Critical views on the music industry, its figures, its trends are acceptable as long as they are directly related to the artistry, production, or reception of music. Did you mention that you should be similar to an academic submission with academic references? This is not an academic fellowship, so you're welcome to put those references, academic references, in your CV, but it's not something that it's not what is being judged, your academic background. Are early academics eligible to apply? Lauren, can you expand on that a little bit? For example, are you like in the beginning of an MFA program or something like that? Um, you don't have to have a degree or be degree seeking. You can be degree seeking as long as you have the work elements. Yeah, Lauren, as long as you have work that is not specifically written for um, academia, um, you'd be a strong candidate. If the only writing you've done is for your work as a student and is not for public consumption, it probably wouldn't be the strongest application because, again, what the fellowship is seeking to doing is really build the bench strength and build the practice for people of color who have traditionally been left out of opportunities to write for newspapers or publications about works that they can write on critically. Um, Part of this fellowship came around as a response to a field of white critics writing about culturally specific types of performances or art that did not have that sort of critical eye or critical background around the culture to be able to write specifically about it. So again, the short answer is um, if you want to submit academic writing, you're more than welcome to show how well you write. Um, but in absence of any writing that the public can consume, it wouldn't be as strong as an applicant. Wouldn't the application wouldn't be as strong. Um, Hopefully that answers your question. If not, please, feel free to rephrase or to ask more questions. Um, so with regard to the writing samples, you can submit up to 3 samples. You don't have to submit 3. You can submit up to 3. We do ask that they be in Word or PDF format. If you're submitting a Word document, be sure that you've turned off and you've saved the document and have turned off track changes or any type of editing comments. We don't need to see those. We don't want to see those. And it does happen. So that's why we also say convert it to a PDF if and at all possible. Whether you are submitting 1, 2, or 3 works, the total number of words submitted across all submitted works cannot be more than 3,000 words. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Please include the information of where and when the piece was published or appeared. URLs or links to websites where the samples were published are not a substitute for submitting the actual work. So if something is published on a blog, we ask you that you print out a PDF of that blog and submit that as your writing sample. Don't submit a Word document that just has a URL to where people can find it because they actually won't be able to do that. So again, if it's published online, that's fine, but we need the actual PDF of the work, not just the URL. Samples that are merely interviews, questions and answers, are probably not going to be competitive. But if you do want to include works with artists, you must demonstrate some type of critical writing about that interview. So it's not just the interview, but it's your interpretation, your kind of take on the responses from the person or the artist that you're interviewing, and how that all comes together in a review of works by that artist. But if it's merely just you asking them questions and answering, it's just not going to be that competitive. Again, self-published works are eligible. So if you have your own blog, that's fine. If you've published on other people's blogs, that's fine. Just make sure you abide by the conditions above. And in terms of self-published works, it should show some depth. Don't start a blog just to publish some of your work right now. But, we do want to be able to see some sort of history, not just something that has started over the last month. How new of a writer is too new? In that case, what else they can do? Unfortunately, I don't have any kind of information at my fingertips for that. I would check out Critical Minded. They are one of the funders of this fellowship, and they have that is their life's work is dedicated to uplifting writers of color who are writing critically about the arts across all arts, not just music. So they would probably be the best resource to go to. Also, Cafe itself, the application system has a way to search for fellowships based on different criteria, so you can check that out. There's nothing too new. If you've only been writing for a month, you're more than welcome to submit your works. It's just a matter of how competitive they would be compared to people who've been writing for maybe a year or so. But people, there's not in our experience, there isn't just sort of like one moment where somebody's a writer or not a writer. I think you come to being a writer at some point. Would it be appropriate to submit a writing sample that has been published but is co-authored? You could submit that, and that is where that part of the application that discusses what you want the review panel to know, and put in there that this one particular work that you submitted was co-authored. Talk about your contributions to that published work. Talk about why it was co-authored, who your co-author was, and make the case of why that is one of the better writing samples for you to use. Please do not submit works of fiction, screenplays, stage plays, or musicals, poetry, unless it's in some type of very creative form of music criticism, or other works that are not music criticism or music reviews. Every year we get people, I don't know if they're not reading the application information for the fellowship, but we've gotten people who have submitted books in various stages of development, screenplays, poems. I think the confusion sometimes is that it's a fellowship for all writers. It's not. It's a fellowship program for writers who are specifically writing about arts as a way of arts criticism or arts reviews or arts journalism. So hopefully that makes sense to everyone. If it's not, please feel free to ask a question. So in terms of numbers, this is where a lot of people get hung up. The total number of words for all of the submissions taken together is 3,000 words. So for example, a sample, if somebody submits only one sample, and you're welcome to do that, and it's 2,500 words, it's acceptable. If it's 500 words, it's acceptable. If it's 3,550 words, it's not acceptable. If you're submitting two samples and one has 2,500 words and another one has 1,500 words, they're not acceptable. Same thing, well, not the same thing, one with 1,500 words and one with 500 words. Again, it's a total of 2,000 words, so it's acceptable. Another one with 300 words and 750 words, again, acceptable. 1,200 and 1,775 words gets you right under that 3,000. When submitting three samples, so this first example, again, well over 3,000. This sample with 750 words, 800 words, and 1,000 words still falls under the 3,000, so that's okay. Three samples. We've had people submit samples that had either just under 3,000 or in some cases, each one had more than 3,000. That application is not acceptable. And then finally, this one, 1,000, 1,400 words and 700 words is just over the line. And so we're not ogres. We will make note of it for the reviewers. They're not required to read more than 3,000 words. It's up to them. But we'll let them know. We're not nickeling and diming people here. If something is well over 3,000, it's just simply not fair to the reviewers who have to put in the time to read all of these applications. It's not fair to them to figure out if you're submitting more than one, which one they should read or where they should stop reading. So just be careful with this. And we have a question. I understand music critiques are acceptable. To clarify, would songwriters qualify as well? Songwriters qualify for the fellowship? Is that the question? Or is it a review or critique of a songwriter that you're asking, Brittany? While we're waiting for Brittany, wanted to just talk a little bit about the application process and what happens after the applications are received. There's a first pass that we as staff do, which is basically the basic elements of qualification. While Sophie and I are very much involved in the arts, neither of us are experts in writing as a critique. That's not our forte. So we actually we're not part of the review process in terms of the actual panelists who are industry professionals. But we take the first pass to kind of make sure that an application is complete, that the person meets all the basic eligibility requirements. And then we start to look at two things, basically. We look at the curriculum vitae, the CVs or the resumes, to get a good understanding of whether you fall into the scope of 2 years or less. And then we also look at the writing samples. But the only thing we're looking at for the writing samples is to see if they are, in fact, works of criticism. Any of those that are not, or any of the ones applicants that we feel have much longer writing experience, we put into a separate list that is then presented to the review panelists, and they have an opportunity to weigh in whether that application should be considered or not with all the other applications. So that's sort of like the first round of cuts, just to make sure that the applications themselves are eligible. The second round, the reviewers will take a look at the writing samples as the primary judging of what they're going to look at, and then look at some of the other pieces, such as your cover letter, as well as your anything else that you wanted us to know. We then kind of do some statistical analysis, and depending on the number of applications we receive, we'll present to the panelists a group of between 8 and 12 applications that are the highest scoring applications. We also look at those applications that had the highest standard deviation of scores. So what that means is there was some polarization to that application. There were a couple of judges that maybe scored it exceptionally high, and a couple of judges that scored it exceptionally low. We feel in those cases that is something that the panelists should discuss as they look at that final group of applications. They will make their decisions then based on the entire application with all the elements, and then 2 winners will be selected at the end. Um, Brittany, I didn't get the qualification on your question, so I'll just say songwriters are more than welcome to submit an application if they want, but the works that they submit have to be music critiques, music pieces of music journalism, or music reviews. It can't be a song that they've written, if that's what the question is. Um, Again, applications are only accepted through the CAFE portal. That is eligible on, can be found on the place where you found the information about this webinar. Um, the login you use is either an existing CAFE account that you have, or you can create a new one. If you have technical issues with the system, please contact their help desk. Um, we we can't do password resets. We have no visibility or access to the system itself. If you're having trouble contacting them, though, let us know, so we'll see if we can help you out that way. Application elements cannot be submitted by email. So if you are having trouble uploading your PDFs or your Word documents for whatever reason, please contact CAFE. They can help you with whatever the issue might be. But you can't submit them to us separately. There's no way we can track those documents along with all the other applicants and their documents. Everything must be in the CAFE system. So again, please do not wait until the last minute to apply. I suggest applying at least several days in advance if you're going to wait towards the end of the application period. This will allow you time to address any technical issues. We've had applicants in the past wait till the last minute and then for some reason can't upload their documents, can't get their password to work, can't get their questions to be resolved. And so unfortunately, if you miss the deadline, you miss the deadline. Once the call is closed at 11:59 Mountain Time on March 17th, it cannot be reopened. So how many applications do you usually receive? So the first year when it was a very wide kind of call in terms of all types of arts criticism, without any specific discipline, we had, I think it was about 165 applications. Last year, when it was limited to performing arts writers, it was, I think we had about 55 applicants and about 45 that actually were eligible to be reviewed. Um, so any other questions, concerns? You're more than welcome to email us at democracycenter@janm.org. If you have any questions here, we'll get back to you as soon as we can. We'll hold for a few minutes to see if anybody else has any questions that they'd like to ask. Would a review of a music book, like a biography of a musician, count as critical writing? You could submit it as long as it was a critique of the musician and their music, not a critique of the book, if that makes sense. So, Brittany, are you asking if songwriters are eligible? I guess I'm just a little bit confused by the question. Anybody is eligible. Songwriters are eligible to submit as long as what you're submitting, the samples that you're submitting are works of arts criticism, not submitting like songs. So we'll hang on for the webinar for a few more minutes if anybody wants to hang around and ask some questions. Otherwise, good luck. If you have other questions, if you think of something later on or before you submit your application, you want to check something, please feel free to email us. We will get back to you. And remember, if there's two things to remember, just please don't wait till the last minute, and make sure that the samples that you submit are in total under 3,000 words and are works of criticism or reviews or journalistic. Arts criticism isn't writing. So one of the easiest ways to see this is we've had people who have submitted like poems or screenplays or books in progress. The award is not for writers, it's for people who write critically about the arts. So it's arts journalists, arts critics. It is reviews of works of art. In this case, for this year, it is reviews of music. If you have 10 experience working but not writing, yes, they're only looking at your writing experience related to writing about music. So somebody who's been an art critic for many, many years, but has only started writing about music is, everybody, first of all, everybody's welcome to submit an application. It's whether that application is going to be competitive. So in the case of somebody who has been writing critically about art for several years, but is now switching to music, that needs to be explained in other parts of the application, and why, it is important for you to get the fellowship at this time to help you in your career as a music journalist or music critic. But all other kinds of experience, we really don't look at it. If you haven't been monitoring the chat, there are some links in there. Again, a link to Cafe, a link to the fellowship information, a link to the actual call itself. All right, last call for questions. Okay, well, thank you again all for your interest in this. Best of luck with your applications and putting them together. Again, democracycenter@janm.org is the email where you can reach us, and we will get back to you as soon as we can. Again, the application closes on March 17th, but get your applications in earlier than that. Right? Thank you, everyone. Take care.